War of the Spark was meant to be a massive climactic end to the decades-long story arc of big baddie planeswalker turned dragon god, Nicol Bolas. All of his plots led to this moment, a moment of judgment for the story and the characters who inhabit this massive universe. In pulling several unconnected planeswalkers to Ravnica for the conflict, many expected a slaughter as Bolas harvested the sparks of these planeswalkers as part of his scheme, resulting in untold deaths to major characters. But did this happen? What's the body count really like in War of the Spark? Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Aether Hub, diving deep into discussions of Magic the Gathering story. Today's topic is on those we've lost in the War of the Spark. The battle that saw our heroes and unlikely allies face off against Nicol Bolas on the precipice of godhood. With centuries of planning and a ruthless nature, with one of the components of his plot being the murder and harvest of planeswalkers, we of course believed a lot of B-roll characters would be axed in War of the Spark. Yet, shockingly, this just wasn't the case, and many readers were greeted with a surprisingly low body count in Bolas's wake. Today we'll mark who fell and who managed to escape with their sparks off of Ravnica. Even during the early stages of War of the Spark's speculative release, we knew at least one outlier planeswalker character who was going to make an appearance, Dak Was. His name was uttered surprisingly during a lead story developer interview, so we knew pretty early on that he would be involved in the story. However, once spoilers dropped, another shock occurred when Dak didn't get a Planeswalker card, or any associated cards in War of the Spark itself. It seemed like the greatest thief in the multiverse, as Dak self-proclaimed, wouldn't get much love in the set outside of the story of the novel. Then, of course, we were treated with the full-length, official, and beautiful trailer for War of the Spark. In it, it's clear Dak Was wasn't long for this multiverse, as he slowly has his spark ripped from his being to a Linkin Park song. We get the sense that he wasn't gonna bumble his way out of this one. Yet, despite this, some held out hope that some trick was being played, that Dak Was wasn't truly gone. However, in War of the Spark's novel, yeah, it's confirmed. Dak Was stealing from the great Aether sphere in the sky now, with an end to a less known character who leaves a lot of intrigue and interesting plot points unsatisfied and unresolved. I mean, last time we saw him, he was doing some crazy-ish with a magical gauntlet in the underworld of Theros. Next, we saw him brushing all that off, falling into debt on Ravnica and trading that powerful gauntlet away for nothing, and dying to an unnamed mass horde of Eternals. True, Dak was a hero in the story, being absolved and encouraged by a god, Hazoret, when he and his group traveled to Amonkhet on a mission to shut down the Planar Bridge. Though Hazoret told Dak Was that he was a better man than he knows, which actually caused him to stay in the fight even after he could have left, ultimately killing him. It doesn't nearly resolve a lot the character had going on. A sad end to a character, in my opinion, not fully realized. Now this was a terrible tragedy in MTG. Not because I cared much for Domri Raid as a character, but because it saw yet another end to a character without a lot of development, dying in a way that seemed like, honestly, a pretty garbage way to end their pretty confusing existence in MTG lore. I know that's sort of vague, so let me explain. Domri Raid was never an A-list character in the story, introduced as a pretty new planeswalker youth of the Gruul clan in our return to Ravnica. His story was short, without a lot of backstory or involvement at all with the story of the Return to Ravnica block. His card and inclusion in the story was limited to a small short story of his origins as a planeswalker in the tough, tribal, shamanistic Gruul clans. We hoped that in Guilds of Ravnica, Ravnica Allegiance, and ultimately War of the Spark, Domri's character would be more fleshed out, and while he got more, it really wasn't a lot. Like a lot of other planeswalkers who initially worked alongside Bolas in his schemes, Domri was promised power and everything he wanted if he supported the Dragon Planeswalker's plot to overturn Ravnica. Domri Raid, basically the living embodiment of the Gruul clans, just wants chaos. To buck the yoke of society and the city life of mainstream Ravnica and bring back the wild, savage nature of a world lost to the plane. The dragon promised chaos and power to Domri, and that's exactly what he got. Not getting into his rise among the Gruul, which, believe me, wasn't that interesting at all, Domri's story starts to get somewhat intriguing at the start of War of the Spark. Domri and the Gruul are already in the main of the city, causing a ruckus when Bolas attacks with his Eternals. And seeing the undead horde, Domri fears that this mindless threat is too big to ignore, and attacks this new enemy. For a time, it even looks like the Gruul Guildmaster was actually going to flip again and be a good guy here, but yeah, that just didn't last. In seeing Bolas in action, tipping the elemental being that was the Selesnyan Guildhall of Vitu-Ghazi, Domri saw the toppling of what he considered to be all that was wrong with the city and the other guilds that built it. Domri was again on Team Bolas. But for all that vigor and enthusiasm, Bolas didn't need Domri anymore. He had already weakened the whole of the guilds with his riots, and Bolas needed something else. Sparks. That was the endgame here, and Domri's spark was as good as any others. As a random Eternal grabs the young Gruul leader, Domri finally realizes the mistake he made in trusting a chaos-bringing dragon god, learning that chaos can cut both ways. Domri's spark is drained and he dies. This was a weird twist-and-turn end for a C-roll character that really had no place in the main story or even the grand story of Ravnica before this most recent story. The fact that he flips a few times and just ends up being pretty evil overall, and being betrayed by someone even more evil, was a pretty unsatisfying end for Domri Raid. You guys all knew this was coming. In fact, a lot of us in the Vorthos community predicted that the War of the Spark would be the final story for Gideon Jura, a character with a long, deep history in MTG lore. He's been around for a long time and is a staple image for Magic as a classic hero and representative of players who identify with white mana. Though well developed and loved, his story had come to a somber end on Ravnica after years of using that invulnerable shield to protect himself. He was unable to stop this final showdown with Bolas. As the leader of the Gatewatch and the linchpin for the modern MTG story arc and storytelling in general, Gideon's tale has taken him from a name change on Theros to challenging gods, befriending others, building up the Gatewatch, and ultimately sacrificing himself to defeat another god. Gideon's tale is one of tragic losses, feeling as if he was no true hero, or at least not good enough as he has lost almost all that he holds dear. He failed to protect everyone, and thus his life was marred by self-doubt. So again, without getting too much into the details that I want to lay out in a separate video, the great Gideon Jura does die while protecting another of the Gatewatch. Well, formerly of the Gatewatch, Liliana Vess. Liliana rebels against Bolas despite knowing it's going to cost her her life, a life that she went through a lot of trouble to lengthen. Gideon, at this point in the fight, really didn't have much left to offer in the battle against Bolas. His sacrifice though gave the Gatewatch and the multiverse a fighting chance. In giving his shield over to Liliana as Bolas triggers the binding magic of her demonic contract, the effects of that contract impact Gideon, basically turning him to dust, and leaving Liliana Vess a powerful necromancer to control the Dread Horde and defeat Bolas for good. There was a reason Bolas controlled Liliana. He knew she could defeat him. He, however, never expected Gideon to sacrifice his own protection to save a perceived enemy of the Gatewatch. But hero's gonna do what a hero's gonna do. This was the best end of any character in War of the Spark, as expected as it was. Out of all of the named deaths, yes, just 3 total, Gideon's was the most well written and impactful to me personally. We get some heartwarming shots of his spirit, maybe ending up in the underworld of Theros, his home plane, back with his original rat pack of friends known as the Irregulars, who he originally let down and they died as a result. So it's good to see him happy and reunited again, although it's unclear if this is real or just a memory from the writing. What we do know is that Gideon is respected and remembered as the hero he was. The reason Ravnica is free and the multiverse remains safe. It was a good end to a great character. And so yeah guys, this massive bloodbath of half-written characters we all expected just didn't really happen. With only 3 major deaths to note in War of the Spark, Wizards of the Coast just glided past the apocalyptic end we all kinda wanted and kissed it slightly before pulling away and taking a half measure. killing two rather obscure and, let's be real, insignificant to the main story Planeswalkers, and Gideon, who is major, don't get me wrong, but expected. Gotta admit, I was a bit disappointed in the story team with War of the Spark, and I'm not even talking about the novel itself, which I found very poorly written, to put it mildly. But even in the direction of the story, and the decision to only kill off these three was really a punch to the gut. I wanted the story to take a more somber, mature, emotional direction. Losing some beloved characters would have been that push. They just couldn't pull the trigger though, and I think the story ultimately suffered as a result. Oh, and don't at me saying the scores of citizens and unnamed planeswalkers died in the assault. You know damn well ain't nobody care about no-name planeswalkers that's never gonna have a name or matter, so spare me. Anyway, that's your eulogy for War of the Spark. Please pay your respects to the dearly departed by leaving this video a like and sharing it with others, either on social media or on Reddit. We gotta get this out to as many people as possible, and of course, it's greatly appreciated, as it's the best way to help grow the channel. You can also support us on Patreon. See what it means to join the Vorthos army by checking the link in the description below. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time here on the Aether Hub. See ya!